Welcome to part 9 of this Biplane Blender tutorial series, where we're creating this Boeing-Stearman Model 75. If you haven't seen the previous parts, you can check out the tutorial playlist linked in the video description. So in this part, we're going to be doing some lighting, we're going to add a camera, and we're going to start doing some of the materials, and we're going to make the materials for the base body object. Now before we start with this part, I wanted to let you know about a really great Blender add-on for quickly adding decals to your models. With the Decal Master add-on, you can quickly and easily add decals to your 3D models. Once you install the add-on, use the add-on settings on the right side panel to start projecting. Then choose a decal image texture from your computer or use a decal from the provided decal texture pack that comes with the add-on. You can then move, rotate, and scale the decal and simply press the spacebar to stamp the decal onto your model. After placing the decals, you can customize the decal settings like changing the colors, adding wear and scratches, and many more settings. You can find my full add-on review video with the link in the description, and by purchasing through my affiliate link, you'll be helping to support this channel. So I'm going to start by adding an HDRI light. Let's first open up the side panel here, and we're going to go to the render properties, and I'm going to be using the Cycles rendering engine because I'm going for realism. Now you could use Eevee if you want to, but it won't look as realistic, so I'll be using Cycles. Let's go here to the world properties, and then I'll click on the yellow dot next to the color, and let's choose environment texture, and then I'll click on open to open the HDRI. So here's the HDRI that I'm going to be using. It is the Autumn Field 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com. So I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version. So I'll have a link to this free HDRI on polyhaven.com if you want to download it. And also, as I mentioned earlier, if you purchase the resource pack or the project files, then you'll get all the different textures and HDRIs and everything that you'll need to follow along with the project. So I'll just be clicking on this, and I'll click on open image. Let's go into the rendered view to see how it's looking. So already we have some nice basic sky lighting for our scene. Let's go here to the render properties, and I'm going to scroll down, and on the film tab I'm going to turn on the transparent button just so that we can't see the HDRI in the background. And then also let's edit the color management. So I'm going to use the view transform of Filmic. I like that a bit better than AGX. And then here on the look, I'm going to change this to a very high contrast. Now it looks a little bit blown out and white right now, but once we add materials, it'll look a lot better. I also thought it would be nice to add a camera just so that if we ever want to jump into the camera view, we can. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm just going to add a camera, and I'll just place the camera right about here and maybe drag it back a little bit. I can also use Control B to add a camera boundary and just kind of move it in like that. So now we just have a nice camera view. If we ever just want to jump into the camera view, we can kind of see what it looks like from the camera's view. So now for this part, we're going to do all the materials for the body object. So what I'm going to do here in the outliner is hold down the control key and just click on the eye next to the body collection. So this way, by holding down the control key, it's only going to preview the body but hide everything else from the view. So we're going to be creating all the materials for these objects. So let's go into the rendered view. Let's actually go to the shading tab, go into the rendered view. We're just going to select the body, and we're going to add a new material, and let's just call this plain body. So to start off, I want to create a very subtle dirt texture over the surface to add more detail. So I'm going to add a noise texture. Let's hit Control T, and we're going to use the object coordinates. And let's just preview the noise texture. So that's what it's looking like on the object. Now let's turn the detail up. I'm going to turn it to like a 10, and I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.8. Now I want to make it more contrasted, so I'm going to search for a color ramp, drop this here, and I'm going to drag this value over. I'm going to drag it way over kind of to about here so that it's much more subtle and you can't see the dirt quite as much. So now I want to create some custom colors for this. So I'm going to add a mix color, which we can use to create the paint color and the dirt color. Now the color ramp is going to go into the factor, and for color A, I'm going to make it kind of this like grayish brownish color for the dirt. And here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same color I'm using. And then for the base airplane color, I'm going to use this nice dark blue color. And again, here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same color. So now we just have the blue color, and there's just a very subtle dirt texture. So now to keep everything really nicely organized, I'm going to box select all these nodes here, use Control J to join together into a frame. You can select the frame and press F2 to give it a label, and I'm going to call it dirt. What I now want to do is add an ambient occlusion to add a little bit more dirt in the cracks. mix. So I'm going to add the ambient occlusion node. Let's drop it right up here. And then I want to add a color ramp to make it more contrasted. So just add a color ramp. We can take the color and put that into the color ramp, and let's preview the color ramp. So I want to drag the black tab over and drag the white tab over to make it a little bit more contrasted. So you can kind of see there, kind of in the cracks and crevices, it looks a little bit darker. So let's join these together into a frame, and I'll just add a label and I'll call it AO for ambient occlusion. So now I want to mix the ambient occlusion into the dirt. So what we're going to do is search for a mix color, drop this here, and this mix result can go into color B, and then we can take the ambient occlusion, the color ramp, and we're going to put that into the factor. And let's preview this mix here. So now what we're going to do is take the same dirt color and we're going to drag and drop it here into this mix, just like that. So it is a little bit subtle on this object, but if you look right here in the cockpit, you can see here it is before and here it is after. So you can see the ambient occlusion is adding some dark areas to the creases and crevices. So let's now take this mix color, we can put it into the base color, and I'll just preview the principled shader. And let's turn the roughness down to a 0.2, just a 0.2, so the paint is a bit more shiny. Now I also want to add some more details to this texture by adding some surface imperfections. So let's add the surface imperfections texture. So I'm going to search for an image texture, and I'll just drop it right up here, and then let's open the texture. So here's the surface imperfections texture that I'll be using. Again, it is free with the link in the description if you want to download it. Also, if you purchase the project files or the resource pack, then you'll get all the different textures that you'll need to follow along with the tutorial. So I'm going to select the opacity surface imperfections, and let's open image. Now I also downloaded the 4K JPEG version if you're wondering what quality I downloaded. So let's open that image. We can preview this image. So with this surface imperfection selected, let's hit Ctrl T, and we're going to use the UV coordinates. Now I'm going to be using a few different UV maps in this same material because we're going to be adding the tail number or airplane number. So what I'm going to do instead is search for the UV map node, and this way I can specify a specific UV map. So I'm going to click on the drop down and just add the default UV map, and then that can be replaced here for the texture coordinate, and I'll just delete this. So this way, by using this specific UV map, we can change the UV map by duplicating this and adding a different UV map in the drop down for the other texture. Now let's go back to the layout real quick, and I'll go back to solid view. So if I go into edit mode, you can see we still have a mirror modifier, so the texture is going to be mirrored exactly to the other side, and I don't want that, it just won't look that realistic. So let's go to the modifiers, and I'll just click on the drop down and apply the mirror modifier. And then what I'm also going to do here in the outliner is I'm going to make a new collection, and I'll rename this collection to lights and camera. And then I can take the camera and put it here in the lights and camera, just that we have an extra collection for the lights and the camera. And maybe I'll change it to like a blue color. That looks a bit nicer. So let's now select this object, and we're going to go to UV editing because we need to properly UV unwrap this so that the texture can be applied. So we're going to see those little dribbles of the surface imperfection kind of going down the airplane. So to UV unwrap this, we are going to go into local view so we can see it better, and then we'll go into edit mode. And we're going to go down to the very bottom, and we're going to select that entire loop. So it'll go all the way down, all the way over, and then all the way back. And I'm now just going to hit U, and we will mark seam. So now if I select everything, let's hit U again, and we're going to do the unwrap angle base. So there is the UV map, and I want to rotate it, so I'll rotate it by 90 degrees, and that way the dribbles are going to be going down the airplane. Because if you can imagine this from top view, like there's both of the cockpits, those two holes there, and then here's the side of the airplane in the back. So we want to rotate that so the dribbles go down the side of the aircraft. So let's go into the rendered view. You can now see they're going down the side of the aircraft, so that looks great. Now let's go into edit mode, and I'm going to select everything, and we're going to scale the UV island up a little bit because I want it to be quite a bit bigger, because I want to see a lot more of those dribbles. So let's go back to the shading workspace. So now what I want to do is edit the colors a bit. So we're going to search for a color ramp, put it here after the surface imperfections, and then I'm going to click on the gray tab here, or the black tab, and I'm going to make it a gray color. So let's just turn this up a bit. And here's the gray color, here's the hex value, if you want to use the same exact color that I'm using. And then also this white tab, let's drag it way over, and let's make it much more contrasted. So now we just kind of have this gray and this white texture. So now what I want to do is mix it together with a noise texture so you can only see it in some areas, and it will just kind of make it more patchy and random. So I'm going to search for a noise texture, drop it here, we'll hit Ctrl T, and we're going to use the object coordinates. Let's preview the noise texture, and I'll change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to a 6. I'll turn the detail to 10 so it's pretty pretty detailed, and the roughness to a 0.7. So now I need to search for a color ramp, and we'll put it here after the noise, and I can drag the black tab over, and I'm going to switch the white tab so it's on the other side, and I'll drag it to about here, and I'll drag the black tab over here. Now I think the size of that texture is a little bit too big, so instead of 6, I'm going to use a scale of 3 instead. That's a bit better. So to mix these two together, we're going to add a mix color, drop it here, and I can put the color ramp into color A, and this color ramp up here with the noise texture, that's going to go into the factor. And then here on color B, I'm just going to make it fully black. So now you can see that it's black in a lot of areas, but then there are just some little like gray areas here and there with the surface imperfections. So let's box select all these nodes, add them into a frame, and we'll add a label, and we'll call this details. So I now want to mix that into the base color, so we're going to duplicate this mix and drop it here. And we're going to take the ambient occlusion in the dirt, we're going to put that into color A, and then we're going to take this mix color here with the details, and we're going to put that into the factor. And then color B, we're going to make kind of this dark brownish grayish color. And here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same color I'm using. So now you can see the little surface imperfections are just here in little bits, but there's also parts where it's a bit more smooth and not as much dirt. Now I also want to add this into the bump, so we're going to search for a bump node, and I'm going to take this mix here from the details, and we're going to put that into the height value, put it into the height of the bump. Let's preview the bump. So you can see it looks really bumpy, but that is way too strong. First I want to invert it so that it's going back in instead of coming out, and then I'll turn the strength way down to like a 0.03. So it's much more subtle. And let's now preview the principled shader, and the bump normal can go into the normal. So now it's just going to give a very subtle bump. It is a little bit hard to see, but it still is there. I just want it to be pretty subtle though. And then also make sure that the second mix color, that is going into the base color, because the second mix here is going to have all these textures combined. So I now want to add the tail number. So we need to create a new Blender file for the tail number, and we need to create a texture for the tail number. Of course, if you purchase the resource pack with all the different textures and everything, then you'll already get the texture, so you can just skip this part. But I'm going to be opening up a new Blender file, and we're going to create that airplane number texture. Now I'm going to show you in the tutorial how to manually add the decals into the shader editor. However, if you have Decal Master, which is a great Blender add-on for adding decals, then you can just quickly use that add-on to place the decal onto your model. And I have an add-on review video showing you how to use Decal Master, so if you want to check out that add-on review video, link to that is in the description. And I also have an affiliate link to the add-on on the Blender market, so if you're interested in purchasing Decal Master, link to that will be in the video description. But I know not everyone watching is going to be able to purchase a paid add-on, so if you can't use Decal Master, I'll be showing you how to set it up manually using mix colors, and we're going to be mixing in the texture. So let's open up a new Blender file to create the texture for the airplane number. So in a new scene in Blender, I'm just going to delete both of these objects. I'll go to top view, and I'll bring the camera to my view. And then I'm going to go to the add menu, and I'm going to add a text object. Now you can make whatever airplane number you want. I'm going to do 432 because that is the current Blender version that I'm using to create this tutorial. So I thought that'd be kind of cool, kind of a nod to Blender, Blender version 4.3.2. So I'm going to scale this up really big, just like that. Scale up just as big so that it pretty much fits the entire camera view. Now, the default text in Blender doesn't look that great, so I'm going to be adding this cool military font from 1001fonts.com. So again, link to that is in the description if you want to download it. So let's click here on the object data properties, and we need to open up the font here, and we need to click on the regular font. So choose that file icon. So here is the font that I'll be using. Again, this is a free font on 1001fonts.com. It's the Gunplay Regular. So I'll just open up this font, and that looks really cool for the tail number. So let's now go into the rendered view. I'll just add a camera boundary, and what we want to do is go to the world, and we want to delete the world. Now I also want to make the background transparent so that we can add it as an overlay, as a decal. So let's go to the render properties, and on the film tab, I'm going to turn on transparent. Also, let's go to the color management, and I'll turn the view transform to standard and the look to none. So we're not editing the colors at all. It's just going to have the base raw colors. So now we'll select the font. We'll go here to the materials. Let's add a new material. And I'm going to turn the material to an emission shader and just leave the strength at 1. So now if you go over here to the output properties, I'm going to set the resolution to 2560 by 1440. So that's a pretty large image. So it's nice and high quality. I might also just scale it up a little bit more. So let's save this Blender file. So I'll go File and Save. And in the folder with my project files, I'm just going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call this Texture Files. So I'll go inside the Texture Files folder, and I'll just rename this Blender file out to airplane number and just save that. So now that the Blender file is saved, we'll go to the render properties. Let's open up the sampling, and I'll just leave it at 100 samples with the denoise on. So it's a nice crisp image, and then I'll just render this image. And there we go, it rendered really quick because it was just an emission. So let's save the texture. So we'll click on image and save. And in the same folder, the texture files, I'm gonna rename this to airplane number. And then we need to save this as a PNG with RGBA, so it's using the alpha transparency, and we'll just save that image. So I'll save the file and close it. So now in the airplane file, we are going to search for an image texture, and let's open the texture. So we're going to locate to the folder where we saved that texture we made. Let's click on airplane number and just add this image in here. Now I want to make sure I use a separate UV map because I want to use the UVs to place it there on the side of the airplane. But you can see right now we're using this UV map for the surface imperfections. So if we move around the UV map, it's going to mess up the placement of the surface imperfections. So let's search for another UV map node. We're going to drop this here and let's plug the UV into the vector. Let's now open up the side panel and we're going to go here to the object data properties and let's open up the UV maps tab. So right now we're using the default UV map for the surface imperfections. Let's click on the plus here to add a new UV map, and I can call this airplane number, and then click on this because we want to preview the UV map so that when we UV unwrap it, it'll UV unwrap the airplane number. So now in the drop down we can choose the airplane number. And now what we can do is go over to the UV editing workspace. And if you scroll right over here, make sure you're previewing the airplane number UV map. So I'm now going to select everything. Let's go to side view and I can just hit U and we are going to project from view. So we can just place the texture on the side. So now we can go back to the shading workspace and I want to select these nodes here, join them into a frame, add a label, and I'll just rename that to airplane number. So now to mix the airplane number into the base color, let's drag the principled shader back and I'll duplicate this mix and stick it right here. And we want to take the alpha. You can see if I preview the alpha, let's go into the rendered view and preview the alpha is going to have a black and white texture. So the alpha can go into the factor. And let's just preview this mix. And then here on color B, this is going to be the color for the numbers. Here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same color. I just have it a very light color, but it's going to be slightly yellow, just to kind of have it off tinted. So it's not fully bright and blown out. So I'm just going to have it be that color. So now we can preview the principled shader and you can see there is the number on the airplane. Let's go back to the UV editing and I want to select everything and now I just want to scale it way up so you can see the number there on the airplane. Now if we go back to the shading workspace to make it so it's not repeating, let's take the repeat here and we'll change it to clip, and that way there's only going to be one of them. So we'll go back here to the UV editing and I can now just select everything and just kind of move it around. And I'm just going to stick the tail number right back over here, scale it up a little bit, and just stick it right there. Now if we navigate over to the other side, you can see that it's inverted, it is the wrong direction. And so this is also why I wanted to apply the mirror modifier so that I can change the UV editing on the other side. So let's go to the face select and I'm going to box select all of these faces right here. Just box select all the faces on this side and I'll scale it, and we'll scale it down on the x-axis by -1, so it's flipped. And then I can just drag the tail number right over there, so now it reads correctly on both sides. So let's go back to the layout here and go into the rendered view to kind of see how that's looking. So there we go, we now have a little dirt with the blue texture, and then we also have the tail number. So let's go back to the shading workspace. So that's going to be it for the plain body materials for now. Now later in the tutorial series, we're going to be texture painting some bolts kind of on the edges, but we're not going to do that in this part. It's going to be a separate part. So now what I want to do is add the same material to this object, but we're going to duplicate it so it doesn't have the tail number. So let's go here to the materials. On the material drop down, we're going to choose the plain body. But then we want to click on this button here to duplicate it, and we're going to call it plain body plates. So it is now a separate material. And then let's go here to the tail number. We can delete the UV map, delete the airplane number, delete the frame, and then also select the mix and press Ctrl X to delete it, and that'll keep the wire plugged up. So now what I want to do is UV unwrap this object. So let's go over here to the UV editing, and I'll go into wireframe, and I'm just going to select everything, and I'm just going to do the unwrap angle base. So there we go, there is the UV unwrap. Let's go into the rendered view to see how it's looking, and I might need to rotate it Nope, that's fine how it is. I like the little scratches and smudges and things going down along the airplane, but I might just want to scale it up a little bit so the UV map is a little bit bigger. Alright, so now I can add the same material to the other pieces. So let's select this plate here. We're going to add a new material and we'll add plain body plates. And then in edit mode, we're going to select everything and we're just going to unwrap with angle base. And then we'll select the UV map and kind of scale it up a little bit. Alright, so that's pretty good. Now for this object here, I do want to have the tail number. So let's click here and we're going to add the plane body. Now if I go back here to the shading workspace, you can see right here, this is red. And that is because this object doesn't have the UV map with that name, because that UV map was on the other object. So if we go here to the object data properties, let's click on the plus here to add a new UV map. We'll preview the UV map. And we're just going to call this the same exact name, so call it airplane number. So now you can see the airplane number is right there, so we'll just select it. So now let's go over to the UV editing, and let's scroll right over here. And make sure you're previewing the airplane number. We don't want to edit the other UV map, just the airplane number. Now before I UV unwrap this, I do need to apply the mirror modifier. So in object mode, let's just apply the mirror modifier. And now in edit mode, you can see it's all geometry. So we'll go to side view and we'll hit U, unwrap, project from view. Now I can select everything and I can scale the UV up. And I just want to put the same airplane number right about there. And then if we go over here to the other side, we need to do the same thing as we did before. So we're going to select each one of these faces. We're going to scale it along the x-axis by -1. And now it's going to be flipped, so that looks correct. So now we have the airplane number on both sides, and I think I'll select everything and kind of scale it down just a little bit so that airplane number is a little bit smaller. Let's now select the engine cap material and we'll go to the shading workspace. We'll add a new material and we're going to call this one engine cap. And this material is going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to make it this gray color, and I'm going to turn the roughness down to a 0.4, and I'll turn the metallic value all the way up to 1, so it is really shiny. Now as I create each material, what I'm going to do is select the object and then hide each object to get it out of the way, because I've added the material, so I'm going to hide this object. Let's also hide this object and then hide this engine cap. Now there's one thing I forgot to do with this object, and that is to unwrap the default UV unwrap so that the texture with kind of the dirt looks correct. So let's go to the UV editing workspace and we'll scroll over here, and instead of the plane number, we're going to use the UV map. So let's go into local view, and we just want to add a loop cut on the bottom so that we can open it up. So we'll go to the vertex select. We'll select the bottom vertices there, and we will just mark seam and then select everything, and we can unwrap with angle based. Now one thing that I want to do is rotate this by 90 degrees, just like that. So now the smudges are going down. Now one small problem with this, it is a bit hard to notice, but one small problem is that because this is rotating over, the smudges is kind of going to be at a slightly different angle. So what I want to do is straighten out the UV map. So to fix the UV islands to make it straight, I'm going to be using a really great Blender add-on called UV Squares. So UV Squares is a free Blender add-on, and it has a really cool feature which will straighten out the UV map. Now I also have an affiliate link to the add-on on the Blender Market, so if you'd like to support me as well as the add-on creator, then you can purchase the add-on on the Blender Market, but the add-on is also free on the GitHub page, so I'll have links to it in the description, whether you want to purchase the add-on or just download it for free. So to install the add-on, you can just click on Edit, go to the Preferences, go to the Add-ons tab, click on the drop-down, and we're going to click on Install from Disk. So you can now just locate to the folder where you downloaded the zip file and then click on Install from Disk. So you can just close Blender's preferences, and then if you hit the N key to open up the side panel, you can click here on UV Squares. Make sure you're in the UV editor when you do this, and you can click on the button to grid by shape. And now you can see it's going to flatten that all out, so that looks a lot better. So now I might want to scale this up a little bit so you can see more of the texture. So let's click back here to go to the shading workspace, and I can just hide this object to get it out of the way because we added a material. So now let's select the front piece here and we'll add a new material. And I'm going to call this engine bumpy metal. So this is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to add a basic noise texture. We'll use Control T, and we're going to use the object coordinates. Let's preview the noise texture, and I'll change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to like a 7, and I'll turn the detail to 4, and I'll leave the other settings how they are. So we're going to use this just to make the metal slightly bumpy. So let's search for a bump node, put it here, and we want the noise texture factor to be going into the height value of the bump. And then we can take the bump normal, and we can put that into the normal of the principal shader. So now it looks way too bumpy, so let's turn the bump strength down to like a 0.05. And then also we can turn the metallic value all the way up to 1 so it is more shiny. Let's also turn the roughness down to like a 0.27 so it's really shiny. And then for the base color, I'm going to make it this gray color, and you can punch in the same hex value if you want to use the same color. Now I think the scale is a little bit too big, so let's turn the scale to maybe like a 3.5 instead, or maybe even just like a 3. That looks a little bit better. So we'll select this object and hide it. Let's now add the windows material. So we're going to select the window. Let's click on new, and I can just call this glass or windows. And I'm just going to add the glass shader, and we're going to replace it for the principled shader. And it's really important that we add a solidify modifier, because you can see without the solidify modifier, the glass just looks really weird and warped. So the solidify makes it look a lot more realistic. So let's hide this object. We'll select the other window, and we're going to add the glass material, and then I can hide that object. Let's now add a simple blue paint material. So it's going to be very similar to the other material, but it's just going to be a very simple blue paint without much smudges or dirt. So we'll click on new. I can rename this to blue paint. So let's press Alt H to unhide the other objects, and I want to select one of these objects here with the blue material. So what we're going to do is box select all of these nodes here. So the ambient occlusion, the dirt, and the mix. And make sure you just select one of the nodes so it has an active node, and the active node has a white outline. I'm now going to hit Ctrl C to copy the nodes, and then if I click back on the other object, I'll press Ctrl V to paste it. So let's put the result into the base color. So now you can see it just has a tiny little bit of dirt, but it's mostly just blue. Let's also turn the roughness down to like a 0.2 so it is more shiny. So we can now select this object here, and let's add the blue paint material. So let's hide this object and just hide all the objects that we've already added the materials to. This object here, we want to add the blue paint, hide that object. This here, the other window frame, add the blue paint. We can hide that and hide that object, and this one as well as the cap and the front. So now what I want to do is add a material to this little spot here on the top. So we'll click on new. Now what I'm going to do is actually make the material for the anti-slip pad, and we're going to be adding the same material to that little anti-slip pad on the wing. But it also looks really good if we add it to this object because it's kind of like a grayish object. So let's search for a noise texture, drop it here, Control T, and we're just going to use the object coordinates. Let's drag these back a bit, and I can preview the noise texture, and let's change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to 600, so it's really detailed, and I'll turn the detail level to 10, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.8. So now I can take the factor, I can put that into the normal, but then let's add a bump node to convert it to bump data. We can put the factor into the height, and then the bump normal into the normal, and let's just preview the shader. Now it's way too strong, so let's turn the bump strength down to a 0.15 so it's more subtle. And then for the base color, let's make the base color fully black. We can also turn the roughness up to like a 0.7 so it's a bit more rough. And there we go, we now just have a subtle, kind of bumpy, dark material. So let's hide this object now. Let's now create the cockpit bed. So we'll click on new to add a new material, and you can call it cockpit bed or cockpit floor. And for this, I'm gonna make the base color fully black, and I'll leave all the other settings how they are. So I'll hide this object. Let's now select the cockpit pipes. We'll add a new material, and I'll rename this to cockpit pipes. And for this, I'll turn the metallic value all the way up to 1, and then I'm just gonna make this a mid-gray color. So that's it for the pipes material, so I'll hide that object. Let's now select the back plate here. We'll click on new, and I'm gonna call this cockpit black, and I'll just make the base color fully black. And then I can hide that object. Let's now select the antenna. We'll zoom into it. We'll add a new material, and we'll call this material antenna. And for this antenna, I'm gonna make kind of like this dark gray color, and here's the hex value if you wanna punch in the same color. But I'll leave all the other settings how they are, so I'll just hide that object. Let's now select the handles. We'll click on new, and I can call this handles. For the handles material, I'll make the base color fully black, and then I'll turn the roughness up to a 0.6. And that's going to be it for the handles, so I'll just hide that. Now we also have this tiny little piece right here, and this piece is just going to have the pipes material. So if we just search for pipes, we'll add the cockpit pipes. Let's go back to the layout, and that's all the objects, so I'll unhide all those objects. So I'll save the project again, and this will wrap it up for this part of the tutorial series. So in the next part of the tutorial, we're going to continue on by doing more of the materials. So when the next part is released, it'll be right up there on the end screen and the link in the video description. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.